Good afternoon. My name is Officer Hanover. Are you Mrs. Goodwell?
It's Miss, but yes, I am.
Sorry, Miss Goodwell.
Please, call me Betty.
All right, then.
I must confess, officer, I'm not sure why I'm here. My sister's murder case is closed. You put the man who killed her in jail. I'm not sure what more I can do for you. Frankly, I'd hoped this whole ugly affair was behind me now. It's been years.
Well, I'm awfully sorry, Miss Goodwell.
Betty.
Yes, of course. We just have a few loose ends we need to tie up.
Is our killer trying to appeal?
Oh, no. He admitted to the murders. But there is one little detail he won't let go of.
Detail? The man could barely form a sentence. His trial was a circus. Don't you remember how he cried and spat? I'm sure he's quite insane. What detail could you possibly need to discuss?
Well, he's been on medication for some time now and speaks with a psychiatrist. The goal is, of course, to get him to own up to what he did, so that he might explain to us why he did it. He has admitted to killing a woman that night, but he will not agree that it was your sister. He swears that he was there to kill someone else that night, and he's quite sure he accomplished his goal. This might be hard to hear, Miss Goodwell, but he swears that he killed you.
Let me get this straight. A crazy person told you that I, a woman seated right in front of you, is dead, and you believe him?
Of course not. We just need to prove to him that you're alive, to break this dangerous delusion he has.
Barbara and I were twins. Anyone could have mistaken one of us for the other in the dark in our night clothes. Does he not understand that he made a mistake?
A mistake?
Well, we've always been certain he wanted to kill me. He had my posters on his wall, stood outside the studio when I was on set. He was obsessed. He knew my every move. Poor Barbara. She should still be alive.
You were supposed to stay home that night, weren't you?
That's right.
But at the last minute you went out?
Yes, I did.
Explain the evening to me again, won't you? I'm going to write it all down. Then we'll have you sign it.
All right. Barbara had plans that evening with a friend from out of town, but she developed a terrible headache. Her friend had traveled a long while to see her, and she didn't want to let her down on a moment's notice, so she asked me to go instead.
As her?
Yes. I know it might seem confusing, but it's one of the perks of being twins. We occasionally switched places if one of us needed something, like to pass a test in a subject one of us wasn't very good at and the other was, or to participate in an activity only one of us liked but was still required.
What kind of activities? Would you give me an example?
Oh, well, when we had to run distances in phys ed, I always did them for Barbara because she had weak ankles. And she took all our chemistry tests because I was no good with the periodic table.
Isn't that kind of manipulative?
Well, it wasn't our most honorable behavior, but it's not easy being a twin. Most people often look at you like you're one half of a whole anyway, so why not prove them right?
Perks, yes. Back to that night. What happened next?
Well, I put on Barbara's dress and shoes and my own pearls, of course. Barbara didn't have any, and they really did make the outfit better. She wore such frightfully plain clothing, I had to add a little pizzazz. Then I took a taxi to meet up with her friend Margaret for dinner and then a movie. Afterward, we went out for a nightcap, and then she went back to her hotel and I went home.
And Margaret never noticed?
No. Barbara and I were close. We shared everything, and we always had. Imitating her came easily to me.
Yes, it must have. We have spoken with Margaret multiple times, and we're quite sure she had no idea. What happened next, Miss Goodwell?
Betty.
Yes, of course. Sorry.
Well, I went home. I went straight to my room to change. When I went into Mother and Barbara's room to return her dress, I discovered them both lying dead.
So, you had your own room, but your mother and Barbara shared one. That's odd, isn't it?
No. I paid the rent. I ought to have my own room, don't you think?
Didn't Barbara resent that?
No. She knew that we all had our place.
That's right. And it used to be the same place, didn't it?
Whatever do you mean?
Well, we have your elementary school records here, and I only see one child. Barbara Elizabeth Goodwell, registered for classes.
An error in the paperwork, I suppose.
Oh, it's not an error at all, is it, Miss Goodwell?
Betty.
Sure. Your mother's signature is on this paperwork. According to the local paper, there were 2 of you born to Miss Mary Goodwell, Barbara Jane and Elizabeth Ann, Betty for short. You both attended an area preschool and went to church, Sunday school, and dance lessons. But then, after your father died, your family relocated and suddenly, according to the U.S. Census, your mother had but 1 child, Barbara Elizabeth. Can you explain that, please, Miss Goodwell?
Mother had no money when Father died. We had to leave our home and move into a tenement. We all had to pitch in, which meant one of us needed to work. But my mother didn't want to choose which one, so she came up with a plan. We just have to be one person. She burned our birth certificates in the fireplace and bought us all the same clothes. Each day, one of us would go to school, and the other would work at the mill. We would come home, tell each other everything, and I do mean everything, and the next day we would switch. This way we both got an education, and we had an extra income. After a while, it became evident who was better at what, and we would lean into those roles, which seemed to benefit everyone. I was more social and talented, better at public speaking, and I had an eye for fashion. And Barbara was smart and retiring. She worked hard and studied harder, got good grades, and was a very high producer at the mill.
So Barbara did the work, and you got the glory.
Well, to put it bluntly, yes. But it was for the greater good. We just played to everyone's strong suits. Eventually, I was discovered, and we moved away from our old neighborhood. Once we were out, we were able to be 2 separate people again.
But you couldn't really, could you? I mean, it must not have been that simple. You both worked so hard for the same thing at the same time. How could one of you be expected to give it up?
Well, because she had to.
Of course. And after Barbara died, your career really took off, didn't it? People say the tragedy must have informed you as an actress.
Yes, I suppose I am a bit more thoughtful now.
And you're married now, correct? To a man you started dating when your sister and mother were still alive?
Yes.
Any children?
1, a boy. What does this have to do with the man who murdered my family?
We just want him to understand how he came to be confused. It happened a lot. The 2 of you even had the same blood type.
Yes, physically everything about us was the same.
Well, not everything.
What?
Not everything about you was the same. Even twins have unique fingerprints, and you had your appendix removed when you were 4, which should have left a scar on your abdomen, correct?
Yes, but you don't propose to make me undress, do you?
No, of course not.
Thank goodness.
We have your sister's records here, which should corroborate everything. Hey, did you know that she was once convicted for shoplifting?
What?
Yes. She stole a watch from a display in a local department store.
Well, that had to be someone else. We would have known.
No, I have her fingerprints on file right here. That's why I said it would be easy to match. I suppose you also didn't know that she was in a short film at 18.
That's impossible. Barbara wasn't the actress. I am.
Well, not after this, I suppose. She appeared completely nude.
What?
The scene was cut by censors and the studio was fined. We have a copy of it on file, though. It was quite provocative. Not very morally sound, if you ask me.
I didn't ask you.
And apparently there were more. We can show you if you like. Boy, that sister of yours was really something else. I can see why you didn't let her out all that often.
Don't you talk about my sister like that. Betty was a good person. She just wanted us to survive.
Who, Miss Goodwell? Who was a good person?
I didn't mean... I get confused sometimes.
I think you're a much better actress than anyone gave you credit for, Barbara.
What gave it away?
We pulled the autopsy photos.
Appendix scar.
Yep. And we matched her fingerprints. So, why'd you do it? Why'd you switch places?
When I saw them lying there, I knew Paul had found her. I couldn't help but think how everyone would say that the best part of us had died. Nobody knew that behind the curtain I made her who she was. I got her good grades in school, I pulled more shifts at the mill to buy her train tickets and professional photos. I took phone calls with agents and wrote thank you letters and did telephone interviews so she would sound smart. They had to play me off as the boring one, so she would have room to shine. Barbara is good with numbers. Barbara can't talk to men. Barbara always looks so plain, they would say. I hated it. We all have our time in the spotlight, Mother would say. But it always seemed to skip me. I saw my turn and took it. Better we kill off Barbara and keep the best of us alive. After all, I earned it. You see, I'm just as much Betty as she was. Even you couldn't tell the difference. Seeing is believing, officer. And I put on quite a show.
You certainly did, Barbara, which means I'll be charging you with fraud. Now, if you don't mind signing on the dotted line, we can process your confession.
No, I won't be signing anything. I've explained how much we changed places, but perhaps we did it a lot more than I let on. Perhaps Betty and Barbara were more of a concept in the end. You have no proof either way. Good day, officer. I'm Holly.
I'm Leslie.
And we would be dead. Leslie.
Hi, Holly.
Hey, Beans. Yay, we're back.
Woo-woo.
Feels like it's been forever.
Yeah.
And it's totally my fault.
It's always your fault.
I know it. I'm the worst.
Ridiculous.
I got the COVIDs.
How dare you?
I don't know. I really, truly wish I hadn't. It was way longer lasting than it was the first time I had it. And not as...
Yeah, I feel like you had
whimsical.
it like similar to mine. 'Cause mine lasted like a long time too.
Just like wouldn't give up. I couldn't think for weeks. And I kind of have to think when I'm doing these.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, some of this was done during the beginning of it. So who knows what...
Oh, okay.
You know?
I'm excited. What a journey.
One time when you had COVID, you told us so much about cannabis.
I did. I should go back and listen to that because I do not remember it whatsoever.
I always think about that too. I'm like, I should listen to that one.
Yeah.
I remember being so excited.
What episode was that?
It was the Tyler Hadley one.
That's right.
But I remember being like, wow, you have so much. COVID made you like have a lot to say.
I did.
But anyway, after spending a few weeks in the grips of COVID, I'm not looking my best. I gotta say, it left me feeling kind of spacey, left me kind of pale, kind of like just looking, I don't know, dehydrated and a mess.
Rough.
I know, it's not good.
No.
So I've tried every remedy known to humankind, including steroids, antibiotics, and anything else I could get my hands on from a doctor to get rid of these offending features I have going on right now. Do you know the doctor was like, I don't care about your complexion right now because you have COVID.
Ew.
I know. I was like, come on, I have to look nice.
It's all part of it, you know?
That's what I said. And they were like, no, go lay in bed.
You're there for your health.
Right.
And your skin is part of, it's an organ.
Also, I want to look cute.
Yeah.
And they were not very understanding. They were like, no, go lay down. Don't worry about face cream. And I said, fine, I'll ask random listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea, though.
I think it's going to work a lot better. So I did hear through this research of one magical, legendary ingredient that just might be able to help me. A little tiny sprinkle of
validation. You're worth dying on.
Soulful this week.
Yeah.
I
don't
like
know where
it.
that came from.
It's deep in your heart is where it came from. I could tell.
And best of all, Leslie, our fiends can give us that priceless ingredient totally free of charge.
What? How?
But how, you must be asking yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like this week they have a lot to live up to with that soulful rendition. It better be good, you guys.
Better be. Tell me.
But how? I will tell you. Simply head on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and or a friendly review. It really is the only way to move this podcast forward. And this year, your review needs to be And this time, your review needs to be very heartfelt.
Yes, please.
Deep from the bottom of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Because ratings and reviews equal attention, attention equals support, and support equals more and better content for all of you. Yes, and more is more.
Yeah.
But if you just cannot wait for more We Would Be Dead in your life, don't worry, you don't have to.
Ooh.
You can support us over on Patreon. Also soulful. There, for just a few dollars a month, you will gain access to our entire catalog of 30-minute horror movies, our special minisodes, our weekly after show, Host Mortem, which is available in both video and audio formats. Maybe you want to see our faces. Maybe you don't. Both are okay. But you should look at our faces. They're not too bad. You'll also get a special gift in the mail from us, the opportunity to participate in some giveaways, merch deals, an on-air toast dedicated just to you, and more.
Yikes.
So much more.
Wow.
And more meaning also our documentary discussion club, Let's Talk Docs, which was postponed in March because of my grave illness.
Yeah.
But we will be posting more information for our patrons very soon. We have some good docs to talk about. I know that we've all watched Quiet on Set. I just watched the last episode of it.
Oh, okay.
It's not as good as I wanted it to be. I wanted all the kids to be in one room, and they're not, but still.
Is this the extra episode or? Oh,
yeah, it's the extra one. It's like a Soledad O'Brien
So this
interview.
would be like episode 6
or 5, whatever it is. Yeah, it's like the actual documentary is done. It's like an in-studio thing with a news anchor, and she talks to Drake Bell over the phone.
Okay.
But yeah, I want to talk about that real bad.
Okay.
Because I watched that while I had COVID.
And then we still are doing Can I Tell You a Secret?
Yep, we have that one that we had postponed.
Yeah.
And I also found a crazy documentary, again, while I was in the throes of COVID, about Jared from Subway that I think we should talk about.
Oh, yeah. I've been wanting to watch that one. That's
like
been
a little...
I don't want to watch it, but I also want to.
I've only watched like the very beginning of it because I was like, I'm going to save this because I feel like we want to talk about it. It is way more intense than I thought it was going to be. It's like super intense, but it's also Jared from Subway. So I feel like we'll have a lot to talk about there. So if you want to participate in any of those discussions, you got to be a patron. They're going to be fun. In all honesty, we are here thanks to our patrons. So come on over and be part of the We Would Be Dead family.
Lovely.
Yeah. And if all of that is a little too much for you, you can simply follow us on social media. We are at Would Be Dead Pod anywhere and everywhere you get your content. You can like our posts, share our posts, and share our posts.
Ooh.
That's a good one.
Like
you can leave us a comment, post about your favorite episode. You can come on over and join our Facebook group and start a conversation over there. There's a lot of nice people hanging out. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell that weird guy who keeps trying to sell you those things that he makes out of his garage. What's that guy's name and what is he selling?
Oh, man. Okay.
Give Leslie 2 assignments.
This is Sebastian. And he is selling miniature chairs.
Miniature chairs.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. They're like for children or just for an aesthetic.
I was thinking that they were like doll house chairs. Like really tiny chairs.
Yeah. He has some of those too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, he has some dollhouse people that buy from him.
All small chairs, but no normal chairs you can sit in.
Yeah, and like the question on the street is, no, never mind. Because I was going to say, because we want him to be a listener. But I was going to say the question on the street is, why is he only making small chairs?
I don't know. What's he keeping in that garage?
I know.
Little leprechauns.
Maybe.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what we found out, that he's just obsessed with leprechauns.
Yep, it's really weird. But you know what? We kind of support him. He's just like a weird guy. We let him have his thing.
It's Sebastian. It's nice.
Sebastian. Then your friends and Sebastian and all his tiny chairs can become fiends. He brings them to every gathering.
Yeah.
And we can
There's
all
always
hang out.
a place to sit at Sebastian's.
You can't sit at any of them. They're too small. But he's going to be a fiend and we're all going to hang out together. Okay, guys. Woo, getting back into the swing of things. I think that is all I have in the way of announcements for right now. I'm sure we'll have some stuff on our socials in the weeks to come, kind of catching up and things.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, Leslie, do you have anything to add before we begin?
Absolutely not.
No. Well, all right then. On with the show. This week, we are talking about the case of the mad sculptor. Sounds very whimsical, is less whimsical than you think. This is the most famous case I had never heard of. I mean, until I found it, but that was very recently. It was, in its day, touted by the press as a crime of the century and placed in history alongside the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby and the murder of architect Stanford White by millionaire crazy person Harry K. Thaw.
Wow.
Yeah, this one is a great big deal. I did not know it existed. The murder of pinup model Veronica Gedeon, her mother Mary, and their boarder Frank Burns on Easter morning 1937 was just the kind of terrifying and lurid mystery pulp fiction reading, film noir obsessed armchair detectives of the time, and to this day, would want to solve. It had everything: sex, madness, obsession, art, and an 11th hour plot twist.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a good one.
And you just heard about it.
I did. And it's so weird because every article about it is like, this was one of those crimes that was so splashy that it made every single headline. It was like at a time where the media would explode with things like this.
Mhm.
And it was just everywhere. And I'm never heard of it. Anyway.
Wow.
It is also called different things in different places. I've heard of this case referred to as the Ivory soap murders. I've also heard it referred to as, there's another name for it. I'm sure I have it in here later, but it's not always called the same thing. So you guys might have come across it and it was just a different name. But I don't know how I missed it. I went through a phase where I read everything about the Lindbergh kidnapping, as I'm sure we all did at some point in time.
Yeah.
And I played Evelyn Nesbit in Ragtime, which means I read everything there is to read about the murder of Stanford White. And if you guys want us to cover that one, please let me know. And this case is always mentioned in the same breath as those other twos, and somehow it just fell to the wayside. Yes, I know I said twos. So imagine my surprise when I found it, not looking for like headline-making crimes or like salacious crimes or the like sexiest crimes. No, you know what made me find this one?
What?
I searched up Easter true crime.
Okay.
Because this was supposed to be our Easter case. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. They're getting it now.
Yeah, but the reason it did is because it occurred on Easter morning.
Okay.
And it was an Easter in March, specifically, just like we had this year.
Okay.
So now it's a mid-April case, though, whatever. So, it's also referred to as the Beekman Hill Murders because this is a very famous area in a neighborhood in New York that had, it's seen a lot of high-profile murders, like a lot.
Oh.
A couple of specific buildings have seen a lot of very salacious murders. So this isn't just a piece of lurid gossip come to life, though. No, it's an investigation, a trial, and press coverage that have all earned a place in American forensic and noir pop culture history. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yes.
Saturday, March 27th, 1937, was an average early spring day in New York City. The weather was cool and windy by midday, sitting at around 43 degrees, which is pretty normal for March. But as the sun sank below the horizon and day turned into night, the temperature plummeted to an almost historically cold 26 degrees in a matter of hours. It was as though something dark had the city in its clutches, robbing the warmth from the air. It would not be a comfortable Easter vigil for any New York Catholics sitting in a drafty, cavernous church that year. But perhaps they were better off there than on the streets, where a madman was wandering, deciding what fresh hell to inflict. Easter morning broke crisp and frosty, and by mid-afternoon, when the church services had ended and New York's Christians gathered to watch the children search for brightly colored eggs and dine on ham or lamb or, for some strange reason, sometimes turkey, and enjoy each other's company or tolerate it, depending on the family, and imagine warmer times ahead. Do you know anybody that has turkey on Easter?
I guess. No, I guess
I don't either, but
normally, I guess it's ham usually.
I know, but it's listed places as like the traditional Easter meal. And I thought, who does that?
Yeah. I would rather that. I don't love ham.
Yeah, I like turkey better.
Mhm.
Like, I really like turkey. That'd be
So
good.
I don't really like turkey, but I like it
Mhm.
better than ham.
Can take or leave ham. I like deviled eggs. That's the good part.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there you go. Joseph Gedeon certainly was excited to see his family that afternoon. He and his wife, Mary, had spent the past couple years estranged, so it had been some time since he had been included in a family holiday. And this year, he had been invited. So he's like really excited. He thinks that maybe this is going to help him like kind of come back home, reconcile with his family, right? Joseph arrived a few minutes early that Easter afternoon with a bunch of white lilies in his arms. Isn't that cute?
Yeah.
We brought Easter lilies. Lilies are also the flower of funerals, but we're not going to think about that right now. He rang the bell at 316 East 50th Street nervously and waited. So now this is an old-style apartment building, which means there's a front door with the buzzer, and then you get let in that door, and then you go up to the apartment door.
Okay.
So he's at the first door, the front door, and no one is answering. Joseph rang again, and still there were no answer.
Ooh.
Yeah. And of course, this is a guy that's on frosty territory with his, estranged wife and 2 daughters. There are some reports that even say they had been divorced, but I think they were just estranged. So he's probably sitting there going like, oh my God, did they reconsider? Do they not want to let me in? Right?
Yeah.
Which I think is sad. He knew that Mary and his youngest daughter, Veronica, and a boarder that was living there were all supposed to be home. So somebody should be able to hear him.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody came. And after a few minutes, Joseph began to worry. Continuing to ring the bell and knock, he knew, though, that his older daughter was coming soon because she was supposed to meet them there that day with her husband. So a few minutes later, she does arrive. His older daughter's name is Ethel, and she comes with her husband. They walk up, and they're like, hey, why are we standing here?
Mm-hmm.
Dad says, nobody's answering. Maybe if you ring the bell. I don't know. Maybe they don't. I don't know what's going on. So Ethel rings the bell herself, as we all would do. Like, let me just see for myself.
Yeah.
Maybe you did it wrong. I'll do it.
Yeah.
She rings the bell and no one answers for her either. And she brings to the table that she had just seen her mother and sister about a week ago, and they discussed their plans for that day. So she knew that they had been around and that they were expecting everyone and nothing weird happened. She's like, no, this was going to happen. So a few more minutes pass. And then another one of the building's occupants comes home, and they have the key to open the front door, and they let the Gedeons in, which is really nice. They could have been crazy people. So they said, okay. It turns out Ethel had a key to the apartment door, but not the front door.
Right.
So once they were in the front door, they knew they could get in if they had to.
Mm-hmm.
So they walk up the 6 flights of stairs.
Wow.
Too many stairs. To see what was going on. So they get to the door. Out of courtesy, they knock on the apartment door, knowing full well that they're going to go right in.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody answers that door either. So Joseph takes the key from Ethel, going like, listen, I'm the dad. I'm going to go in first and make sure everything is okay. And the husband was like, cool, you do it.
Yeah, right?
He opens the door and cautiously enters. Now, at first glance, everything in the apartment seems to be totally in order. The living room is tidy. The kitchen is, for the most part, tidy, except for there was evidence that Mary had begun to prepare roast pork and green beans for Easter dinner. So it was like she'd been like snapping the green beans, and the pork was out there to be like dressed and tied before it went in the oven. And it was just like sitting there rotting on the countertop, which is cryptic. I would hate that. And here's the worst part, in my opinion. They also heard music floating from a radio through the stillness of the house.
No.
Yep, so there's just distant radio music and uncooked dinner rotting on the countertop.
No.
That is sinister.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing good happened there. It looked as though everyone had just stepped into another room and covered their ears real quick, because it seemed like they were like, it seemed like everybody was there, but nobody was there, if that makes any sense. It was very strange. So Joseph started to call for Mary and Veronica, whom they called Ronnie, which I think is so cute.
Yeah.
And Ethel and her husband stepped in behind him and sort of followed suit a few paces behind him. They were like a little more cautious than he was going forward.
Okay.
And something else struck them all as odd at the same time. They realized that Mary's little dog, she had a little Pekingese, who usually had a whole lot to say, had not come to the door to greet them.
Oh, no.
And she was not barking. There was no noise at all. Don't worry, the dog's fine. Dog lives. But the dog knows that shit went down.
Okay.
So they all kind of look at each other and they're like, where's the dog? Why? Okay, let's like cautiously move ahead. They check Mary's bedroom next. It is empty. Her bed was made and everything was in place. It did not look slept in at all.
Mm-hmm.
The bathroom was completely neat and tidy, and things were starting to feel more and more eerie and troubling. James then made his way into Ronnie's bedroom, where he was confronted with a terrible sight. Ronnie lay on her bed, face down, completely nude and not moving. Her neck bore dark, bruisey marks, and so did some of her body, and she was pale with just like no color anywhere.
Ugh.
Yeah. James tried to wake her, but she was cold and she wasn't breathing.
Yeah.
Clearly, Ronnie was dead. This obviously alarms just James at first. He screams for his elder daughter and runs through the rest of the house looking for Mary. Now, where is Mary? She's not in her bedroom. And at first, he sees no sign of her at all. He makes his way into another room, a bedroom that Mary had been renting out to a young English waiter named Frank Burns. And there he was met with another horrific sight, because Frank was also in his bed, but he was in his night clothes and partially under covers. He was covered in blood with multiple stab wounds to his head and neck, very visible. The bed and its linens were soaked through with blood, and Frank was completely still, eyes fixed in a perpetual gaze, not breathing, not blinking, clearly dead.
Wow.
Yeah. But where was Mary? This is a nice size apartment for the time, but it's not like vast and huge, you know? It's like kitchen, bedrooms, bathroom, living room, the end. Frantically, Joseph, Ethel, and her husband tore through the apartment. They looked in the bathtub, they looked in the closets, they looked behind furniture. They really didn't know where else to look, right? But Mary is nowhere in sight. Needless to say, it's time to take a pause and call the damn cops. They're like, well, whatever happened, it's clearly awful. We need the police.
Yeah.
The police arrive pretty quickly, as they often do when notified of a triple homicide. And they begin to investigate. And they find the scene to be quite curious. This clearly hadn't been a botched robbery because all the home's valuables were still present and intact. The only object missing from the apartment was a small clock with an illuminated dial that usually sat on Ronnie's bedside table. As they entered Veronica's bedroom, the detectives couldn't help but notice that she looked vaguely familiar to them. After taking note of the body, one detective bent down to look under the bed. Just then, the little dog, who they were missing before, shot out from underneath and nips the cop on his pants leg. So the dog was like, don't come near.
Yeah.
So he's like, look, this is probably worth looking at.
Yeah.
So the cop gets down on all fours and Joseph Gedeon is next to him. He does the same thing. He bends down and they discover that there is where Mary's body was put.
Aw.
Yeah.
The dog was just sitting
She was
with
just
it.
protecting her. That's why she didn't even like bark or say anything, because she knew the other voices that came in.
Yeah.
Ugh. I know that it's really sad. But she lives. The dog lives.
I know, but not it's just so sad.
It's really sad.
What a good dog.
Yep. So taking a closer look, they see that Mary had been beaten bloody. She was partially clothed and very much dead. And it was strange that her body had been so carefully hidden when the others were right out in the open. Right? That's, if you're going to hide a body, hide all the bodies. So what had happened? Medical examiners called to the scene, did an initial examination of the bodies on, like, right at the scene. And they determined that Veronica had been strangled to death. Frank had been stabbed in excess of 15 times with a long, sharp, unserrated object, so long, smooth object. And judging by the size and shape of the wounds, they assumed it was probably an ice pick, which to us sounds like you had like a weird, scary weapon. But back then it was very common to have one of those because you had a big block of ice and you needed to chisel stuff off. It was also evident from Mary's body that she had engaged in a struggle. So she like really fought whoever attacked her. You could tell by like her hands were all beat up and she had clearly been hit a lot of times. She had also been stabbed a couple times. And then after none of that violence worked, she was strangled. So Mary was like really trying. And then after she was dead, she was stashed under the bed. Strangely, though, both women were in some state of undress. So Veronica was totally naked and Mary was half dressed, but neither of them showed any signs of sexual assault at all.
Okay.
Because that's where the police usually immediately go with that. We think something like that happened, but it didn't. Neither did Frank, for that matter, but he had clothes on, so, Whoever the killer was, they had also cleaned up after themselves a little because they noticed that it had kind of been tidied up, and you could see that they had washed up anywhere where blood would have occurred.
Okay.
Another curious fact was that this apartment, remember it's an apartment, had neighbors up, down, and sideways. And I don't know if you've been in an old apartment building, but soundproofed they are not.
Right.
You can hear footsteps, you can hear conversations, you can probably hear the radio, you can hear everything. And nobody reported the sounds of a violent crime or said they saw anybody suspicious coming or going or had any reason to be alarmed. When interviewed, one neighbor mentioned hearing a scream at around 1 a.m., but nothing came of it. He heard somebody scream, and then he went, oh, maybe they saw a spider or something, and then went back to bed. People sometimes scream.
Right.
I'm not going to judge this neighbor. But another neighbor had something a little bit more interesting to say. He said that he had returned home at around 2 a.m. that Saturday night and noticed that the Gedeon's door was ajar. It was a little open. So he pulled it closed for them and went on his way. He's like, oh, you didn't close the door. He closed it, and then he just kept going.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. The police had also learned at this point that Ronnie had been on a date that evening with a man named Stephen Butler Jr. They had been drinking all night, and he dropped Ronnie off at home at around 3 a.m. Witnesses placed them out and about at that time, so people saw them. That's definitely a thing that happened, and that corroborated Stephen's report. And this meant that whomever committed this crime had probably been waiting for Ronnie to get home. Likely they had been in the apartment and already killed Mary and Frank when this courteous neighbor shut the door.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Ugh. Imagine being that neighbor.
I know.
I would be like, oh, I can't.
I know.
They were right there. That guy could have been right. I would hate that so much.
Rough.
Or any of the people who were 5 wooden planks away from them. That's so wild to me. And another thing about the door, it hadn't been damaged at all. It didn't look like there was a break-in. The lock hadn't been fumbled with. There was no signs of forced entry. And no neighbor's just going to gingerly close the door if it's clearly messed up either. So, there was no reason for them to be alarmed. Police also checked all the windows, which I think is funny because they were on the 6th floor.
Right.
I don't know whose scale. Is it Spider-Man that committed this crime?
Maybe.
He scaled the side of the building.
Well, maybe there's fire escapes.
Maybe. I don't know. But they said all the windows were closed tight and locked. So that's fine. And then there was
scaling the walls.
Just climbing up the side of the building. And then there was the matter of this little dog. Everybody reported that under normal circumstances, this dog was really barky and would incessantly bark at any stranger that entered the apartment. All the neighbors corroborate this too. They're like, yeah, it's a yappy dog. It barks all the time. It's barked at all of us. But that night, they didn't hear a thing from the dog. It was silent. So this led the cops to believe that whoever committed this crime must have been willingly let into that apartment that night by someone who lived there, and they must have been familiar to both the residents and the dog because there were no signs that they should be alarmed. Since Ronnie wasn't home, we think, when this person got there, and Frank was in his bed, it must have been Mary that encountered him first, right? So we're getting a picture. The guy knocks at the door, Mary answers, she lets him in. The dog is not upset. But judging by the state of her body, once the attack began, she really put up a fight. And this would have been the scream the neighbor heard at 1 a.m. Okay. So we can say the violence began probably around 1 a.m., which is a weird time for a visitor to come. So you got to think that they've been there for a little while first.
Yeah.
Surely, though, an act so violent would have woken up Frank in the bed 2 feet away, right? This guy's sleeping in his bed. He's the family's boarder. How could he possibly sleep right through that? Well, normally I would say, yeah, that's really strange. And anyone who didn't know Frank would agree. But as it turned out, there's a very good reason why Frank didn't hear the struggle. And that's because Frank couldn't hear anything at all.
Oh.
Frank was deaf.
Oh. Well, there you go.
Yeah. But whoever killed him probably didn't know that. Because he wasn't connected to the rest of the family. The police assumed that this was a casualty of whatever war this is. They couldn't leave a witness, right? But he didn't witness anything. That's the part that kills me the most. He didn't hear it. Yeah. You didn't need to kill him. You could have just left him there. He didn't know.
Right.
Anyway. Police initially believed that the killer then waited for Ronnie to come home, took all her clothes off, assaulted her, and killed her. And it was easy for them to make this assumption and to think that maybe there was a man that was really obsessed with her because 20-year-old Ronnie was incredibly beautiful. She was young, she was glamorous, and she was a party girl, and there was a reason the police recognized her. Ronnie was also a model. And not the kind that does department store catalogs. She frequently posed nude or in lingerie, sometimes for magazines or photographers, sometimes as an artist's model, but her main gig was posing as scantily clad female victims for true crime magazines.
Oh.
Yep. Particularly one called Inside Detective. Not to be confused with True Detective, which is exactly the same.
Oh.
Yeah. That's actually a magazine, not just an HBO show.
Okay.
Yeah, And it was around, these magazines are wild because it started off as pulp fiction, right? So it was fictional stories like this film noir type situation that's in these pulp magazines that are cheap and easy to distribute. And then people got interested in true crime. So they were true crime magazines that were very similar, super salacious, and pictures like, oh, the victim was a woman. So there's pictures of like an almost naked, beautiful woman tied up next to it. They were around, these magazines, until like 1995.
Oh, wow. That's so wrong.
Isn't that weird though? Like, we absolutely crossed paths with them.
Right.
I have no memory of any of that, but I just thought it was so, I was like, oh, they probably died off in the 60s. No, mid-90s they were around.
Wow.
Yeah, they're kind of our predecessors, so we can't be too mad to them.
True.
So, Ronnie graced covers and pages, bound in ropes, gagged, pinned to bed sheets, and weeping while handcuffed. Sexy times, I told you. She appeared beside stories titled, brace yourself, Party Girl, Pretty but Cheap.
Oh, boy.
And I Am a White Slave.
Okay.
Yep. It was a very stupid time. And she was one of the most popular models Inside Detective had ever had. Her covers sold better than any other issues. She was like a big deal, so no wonder the fucking cops recognized her. Ronnie also appeared, well, there's another reason the cops recognized her. She appeared at an Illustrators Society show for models, which was raided by members of the New York Police Department on November 8th, 1935, because that was basically just a name for taking pictures of naked ladies, which you weren't supposed to do at that time.
No.
So the cops probably recognized her from that, too. Now, as soon as this happened, the press immediately arrived on the scene. Like, press back in these times would just walk into crime scenes. They were just there, hanging out. In fact, we'll get to this. You'll find out who says it and why, but the person who perpetrates this murder, when they're exiting the building, they kind of hang around for a little while, and they hear the press yelling, like the newsboys yelling, like, triple homicide, extra, extra, like that kind of thing. The person who did it heard it. It was that fast.
Right.
That they got like a headline going. And this headline was it. They were all about it. They loved this. It was reported that hard-drinking party girl and scandalous model Veronica Gedeon had messed with the wrong man and gotten herself killed. It didn't help matters either that Veronica had been engaged at the time, but not to Stephen Butler Jr.
Oh.
So she was out with another man.
Oh, no.
Yes. They were like, look at that woman, entangled in so many men, she can't even keep them straight, and she got herself killed.
Wow.
That's what happens to fast and loose women. I can hear Barbara Daly Baekeland clicking her tongue at it. And the court of public opinion decided that they believed that. They were like, yeah, she got what she deserved. You know, people love to judge.
Sure.
They love. But little did they know they could not have been more wrong. The killer hadn't even been interested in Ronnie at all. But the police didn't know that yet either. Thankfully, though, they did keep investigating.
Okay.
I started reading it and I was worried, like, are they going to be like, well, all of that's taken care of. This was a slutty girl and she's dead, so whatever, let's move on.
Yeah.
No, they kept going.
And that's why we're here today.
It is. So first they decided to focus on the Gedeon family patriarch, Joseph. They were like, it must have been the dad, the estranged dad. And they went so far as to arrest him and put him in jail for like 10 days.
Ooh, that's a long time.
It is. And they didn't have a lot of reason to do that. There wasn't any evidence that really indicated it was him. They just had some, we'll get into like the little loose threads that they connected in a minute. But this is a pretty wild thing to do. But I think they had a reason for it. And we'll get to that. But let's talk about the Gedeons a little bit first, right? Joseph and Mary, yes, I am aware of the biblical allusions, and they do run an inn. had immigrated to the United States from Hungary in 1907 during a huge immigration boom and forged a modest life for themselves. They landed in Astoria, Queens, New York, where Joseph opened an upholstery shop. So he didn't make chairs, but he covered chairs.
Okay.
All sorts of chairs. He and Mary had 2 daughters, Ethel and Veronica. I can say for certain that Veronica, the younger of the 2, was born in 1917. And I don't have an exact age for Ethel. It just doesn't exist anywhere. But judging by a bunch of context clues and photos, I'm going to estimate that she was about 4 to 6 years older than Veronica, putting her birth around 1911 to 1914.
Okay.
The Gedeons were by no means wealthy, but Joseph's shop managed to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. Well, the shop and some other stuff that they did, which he may or may not have known about. I'm not sure. You see, times were hard back then. Times are hard now, but back then was pretty rough, especially if you were an immigrant, and people often did whatever they needed to get by. In 1929, the Gedeons moved to a building in the Turtle Bay neighborhood at 316 East 50th Street. That is the apartment wherein the crime will eventually occur. And 1929 was an unfortunate overlap of time periods for most people. It was the final few years of Prohibition, but it was also the very beginning of the Great Depression, which meant that most people needed a drink really bad but couldn't get one.
Okay.
And Mary made that work to her advantage. She was a wise one. So in this building, the Gedeon family lived in one apartment, and the rest of it Mary ran as a boarding house and a series of speakeasies from back rooms and behind closed doors.
Okay.
So she was gambling and selling booze, and it was all shush at weird hours behind closed doors in the back of an apartment.
All right. Sounds fun.
It does sound fun, and I can't help but think maybe the girls were exposed to a little bit of that, but maybe not. I don't know. The girls attended William Cullen Bryant High School. Ethel was serious and traditional. In other words, she was the good girl.
Okay.
Did all the things she was expected to do. In 1931, Ethel married a taxi cab driver named Louis Karamataki, who tragically took his own life just a year later. That's a sad one. But Ethel married again in 1935 to Joseph Kudner, and the pair then moved to Long Island. This is the husband that is arriving with her on the day of the crime. They had come in from Long Island. Ronnie, on the other hand, liked a slightly more fast-paced life, a fact that concerned Joseph greatly. So greatly, in fact, that it eventually led to his estrangement from his wife. During his initial interview with the police, Joseph described his young daughter as a butterfly.
Ooh.
Isn't that cute? Because she was wild and free and rarely had both feet on the ground. She was just this reckless, free spirit. And she liked excitement. But what she really, really, really liked was boys. At 16, she married a man named Robert Flower, which was totally illegal. When her parents discovered this, they quickly had the marriage annulled. And she did not like that at all, obviously. She was still pined for Joseph for a really long time. And we don't have a whole lot of information on this Joseph guy, but I'm pretty sure he was older than her.
Yeah.
Joseph tried to get Ronnie to calm down. He did not like that she was a sassy model. He did not like that she drank. He did not like that she was out late at night. He's a dad. Of course he didn't. But Mary, her mother, seemed to think that, Ronnie found a way to make money during the Depression.
Yeah.
So good for her. And she was popular and people took her out a lot. Also good for her. And she could make her own decisions. She was over 18. So Mary wasn't really too concerned.
All right, Mary.
But she and Joseph fought about this often and bitterly. Joseph was like, no, we got to get her married and safe. And she was like, let her go be a party girl. This is pretty fun. Speakeasy lady was like, more party. So that makes sense to me. Eventually, Mary and Joseph fought so much about Ronnie's state that Joseph left. That's the split. He's just like, I can't be around this anymore. I can't watch her do this to herself. I can't watch you condone it. I'm leaving. So he does.
Okay.
Mary continued to rent out rooms to make money, but on December 5th of 1935, the building was turned over to a superintendent. I don't really know how that kind of thing goes, if they bought her out or what the deal was. But then the building was turned into more of a legitimate apartment complex where they were renting apartments for years at a time and stuff rather than just her scam where she was renting a bunch of rooms during the Depression.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But Mary still had a spare room in the apartment after Ethel moved out, because remember, she got married and moved to Long Island, so they have this empty bedroom. And so she decided to rent that out to help pay the bills. And she rented to several people over the years, all of whom got to know her and her daughters pretty well. So there were people that were not related to them coming in and out of this house often enough.
Yeah.
The police held Joseph Gedeon, after the murders, on a half-baked supposition that he could have been so unhappy with this split from his family. This is what they're saying now after they arrest him. They're like, he was so mad that they didn't change and that he had to do this, that he killed them all.
Mm.
And they also raided his upholstery shop and they found a back room that had like a couple pornography magazines in it.
Yeah.
And a pistol. And they noticed that he had access to upholstery tacks. Upholstery tacks are great big nails.
Okay.
And they were like, well, maybe he went in and threatened them with the gun and then ended up stabbing them with upholstery tacks. Not the same as an ice pick, by the way.
Okay.
Big, but not the same. I suppose now would also be a good time to mention that another unusual thing had come up during the initial investigation. I said that the apartment appeared to be mostly in order, and it did. But there were a few things that were discovered that were rather odd. The first was a single large gray men's glove, the match to which did not live in the apartment anywhere. It did not belong to anybody who was there. It was the wrong size for Frank.
Mm-hmm.
They assume it belonged to whomever committed these crimes, right? And the second weird thing were two small figures intricately carved out of bars of ivory soap.
Oh.
Yeah. Ivory soap that had been in the house. So I guess they found the boxes. Like whoever did it on site.
Oh.
Yeah, which meant that this killer murdered a couple people. And then while he was waiting for Ronnie to come home, he took a little time for himself to make some art.
Now, question, did they immediately think that this was the killer or that like somebody in the apartment whittled some
I think
soap?
they immediately thought it was attached to the killing because it kind of stood out. Like these were very good, very good. Someone who knew what they were doing carved these tiny little intricate figures. And nobody in the house did that.
Mm-hmm.
There was no other indication. I mean, like, I'm sure they asked the family, like, is this a hobby they have? And they were like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Nobody does that.
Okay.
So it was immediately like strange. And one of them looked kind of familiar. We'll get back to it. Detectives thought this was curious, but not as curious as we might find it to be today. Like if we found soap figurines somewhere today, we'd be like, what the fuck, man? But in the 30s, soap carving was a rather prominent hobby, which I didn't know that. And these little figures were like a very, very good example. They were intricate and refined and probably very recognizable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. But before we get to that, I know nothing about this as a hobby. I thought it was like a strange serial killer thing to do, but apparently it's not. So Leslie, can you tell us anything about the art of carving soap?
Yeah.
You know a little bit about soap.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. I mean, yeah, when you were telling me this, it didn't strike me as odd.
I thought it was so weird.
Because I've seen soap sculptures before. I think now though there's more like I guess also what I was imagining was how we have like the molds now. So there's just the soap molds that you can have.
Yeah, this is like a penknife and a bar of ivory soap. Also, there was probably a mess created by it because if you're whittling soap, there's a lot of little flakes that come off of it.
But then the apartment was clean.
That's true.
So
they
you just
did
add a
kind of
little
clean up
water
afterwards.
to it and
suds it up.
Suds it up.
Multitasking.
You go. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, there's a lot of cleaning services use it. So I did look up the history of soap carving, like soap sculptures. And it is kind of interesting. It's all a marketing ploy because it always is. So in the 1920s, Procter & Gamble's P&G's ivory soap faced a serious marketing challenge. Children, it seemed, did not like being washed with it.
Get out of here.
Yeah. And I think they had just done a marketing ploy that was like, it floats. So you know how ivory soap floats?
Yes.
So the reason it floats is because they whip air into it so that it makes it lighter than water.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
But that was a
cool.
whole thing. It's supposed to be like fun in the
Like, it's cute for
bath.
kids?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that they were not buying it. They were like,
Oh, a
"This is
chunk of
stupid."
soap that floats.
Yeah,
Great.
cool.
What do I do with that?
Is there a toy in there?
Yeah, can we get better?
Yeah.
Thanks. You could make it a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is what happens.
Oh, no.
Okay. So if children did not like washing with it, they would not grow up to be adults that like buying it. According to a fascinating interview with Edward L. Bernays, a marketing executive with P&G at the time, the challenge was clear: convince kids to like Ivory soap. Around the same time, Bernays learned that an artist was sculpting with soap as a cheap alternative to sculpting with wax.
Okay.
Suddenly, the soap sculpture competition was born, and a new national craft gauntlet was laid.
Oh, my God.
For the next 15 years, P&G sponsored a spirited competition, which included large money prizes and prestige. The P&G-sponsored competitions were not for the faint of heart. Yeah, so then they would have these competitions, and there would be, like, distinguished, like, people there, like, big names, no names, like, everybody in between.
Everybody knows
was
soap.
there. Yeah. And then anybody could sign up for these competitions. You know, it was like a pie competition.
Except for there's no pie.
No, but there would be, so that you would have like legit artists and
Okay.
also like Boy Scouts there, like doing it.
That feels like a very Boy Scout thing to do.
Right. So P&G victors took home cash prizes equaling as much as $3,775 in the National Soap Sculpting Competition of the 1950, the equivalent of over $30,000 today. They would also win like a lavish trip to New York and more. So there was a lot to win. So what was great about this soap sculpting competition was that it became so popular that, and now people were like, oh, it is cheap. You know, like that one guy was doing it because it was a cheaper option for them. So then schools started picking it up. So then 23 million children in public schools were carving soap as a creative outlet.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's very popular.
Yes.
Oh, no.
And it makes sense because it was the Great Depression. So here's like something really cheap that we could get for them.
Here's the soap.
Mm-hmm.
I bet it was cheaper to make Ivory soap, too, if it had more air in it, because that's less product.
Yes. Well, exactly. Yeah. So this says, so this article that I'm reading is a blog from the Milwaukee Art Museum.
Ooh.
It said, by the time of the Great Depression, the machine age had changed the workforce, and the landscape, and even the products available for purchase, triggering a dramatic resurgence of do-it-yourself hobbies. With a cheap bar of soap, a penknife, a orange stick, and a cleverly employed hairpin, anyone could carve a flower, a portrait, a cattle scene, or a tree. And if you were talented enough, a cash prize awaited you.
Okay, so be good at soap.
Yep.
Got it.
But yeah, there was soap sculpting books that were produced, manuals, pamphlets, classes.
Oh my God. So it was a very big trend.
Yep. P&G even ran Ivory soap carving lessons to local newspapers, complete with a short tale about the carved subject, steps on how to carve the image, and of course, a well-placed reminder that your mother can use Ivory soap to clean dishes, clothes, and other pretty things. Yeah.
So save the little shavings, clean dishes, and pretty things.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting too, that it was like in the newspapers as like, try to carve this one, like this image.
That is fun.
Yeah.
Aw, we should have done that up during COVID. We should have brought back soap carving.
I know. Well, something we can do, you know?
There you go. We're going to carve some soaps.
I love to whittle things.
Who doesn't love to
I love whittle things.
Just a whittle thing.
Just like Sebastian in his whittle chair.
Oh my goodness. He also likes that.
Yeah.
Maybe they're made of soap.
Maybe.
Comes right back around.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's so little.
It's just a bar of soap. That's all he can do.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense to me. Okay. So I mentioned that when the detectives look at these little soap figures, they kind of had an idea who they could ask about them. And that is exactly because of what you just mentioned. Procter & Gamble, the makers of Ivory soap, hold this contest every year. And somebody wins.
Yeah.
So they figure whoever judges them probably has seen quite a bit of soap sculpture.
Yeah.
And they were judged most often by a man named Henry Byrne, who was a soap carving expert.
Okay.
He wasn't a celeb.
Oh, I wonder if he was the original guy.
Could have been. Maybe. But he judged these contests, and then I guess he made a living doing some of this. So they called this guy up. They're like, listen, Ivory Soap Guy, we need you to look at these. Tell us if you've ever seen anyone who carved like this. They're pretty original looking, and they're very intricate. So Henry looks at the sculptures carefully, and he tells investigators that he has no clue who could have carved them. And then he said that they were pretty amateurish and wouldn't have really come onto his radar.
Oh,
but
nasty.
He lied. Yep. He knew exactly who had made them, but he didn't want Ivory Soap to have bad press. And so when the police asked him if he knew anything about them, he said no.
This is wild.
Because the press got a hold of the story right away, so he knew what it was in regard to.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, nope. Never. Nope. Meanwhile, the man who commits this crime ends up being the previous year's winner.
Oh, this is wild.
Yep.
Wait, this is going to be a little bit of an inside story for us,
Please.
But remember the movie I was telling you about the other day?
Yes.
It's called Bucket of Blood.
Oh, I hope we watch it.
And it's like from this era.
Nice.
And it's literally, the guy is like making these sculptures out of the people that he killed. Like he's like covering them. And so they look so intricate, but the art collector, it just will not tell anyone what's happening, even though he's figured it out. And he's so uncomfortable by it.
Oh, no.
That he doesn't want to
doesn't want to get Ivory Soap in trouble either.
Yeah.
I have to look at pictures of this because you've told me about it several times. I hope we should watch it soon because it really does tie in well with this case.
It does.
Oh my God, the cat.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't mean to stab it.
It still has the knife sticking out of the cat.
Yeah, that was part of it.
This movie is wild, you guys. We'll definitely do something with it. Thank you for that contribution, Leslie. Oh my God.
It's so good.
Yeah, so Henry Byrne lies. And he does later say like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I did recognize those. But he never like out and out admits that he knew exactly who it was.
Or also, I would also love if he really didn't recognize. He's like, these are amateurists, but then later found out that like it was the winner.
And he
was just
so
like,
stupid.
Oh, I knew. And he'd rather be like the asshole that just didn't say anything. But I was doing it for a good cause. And he was just like, it's all Ivory to me.
I really have no taste at all. It's his wife that knows. Oh, no. Oh, God. And that brings me back to an interesting fact. This like weird little cover-up soap thing. And the fact that the police are working on this totally unrelated lead while they have Joseph Gedeon in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So if they really think he did this, what are they doing out in the world looking up soap guys?
Right.
I think, and so do several other people, that this investigation into the father was a red herring to keep the press away from the actual investigation because we have just seen how it negatively impacted their work.
Right.
Clearly, people had heard of it, and that guy lied. Mm-hmm. So there's proof right there that they need the press to not get any more wind of what they're doing until they tell them from their own mouths.
Right.
So there are a lot of reasons why I think that it's a red herring, and the soap carving is only part of it. The other thing is the glove they found in the apartment. Remember they found that gray glove? Was way too big for Joseph Gedeon.
Okay.
And he hadn't lived there for a few years. And if it had been his, it would have been pretty obvious. For another thing, Joseph didn't know anything about soap carving at all. And finally, they had found fingerprints in blood near the victims on the soap figures. And they didn't belong to Joseph Gedeon.
Well, there you go.
Because when he's arrested, he's obviously fingerprinted. They can check that immediately.
Right.
And they did, but they still kind of held on just because that's what they wanted people to talk about. Which sucks for Joseph Gedeon.
For sure.
They probably should have told him that because he was really upset about it.
Yeah.
They should have been like, listen, dude, I just need you to be very cool in jail. We'll bring you like some cheeseburgers and make sure you're hooked up and you can take a nap. But like, we really need to do this to save your family. Yeah. And if that would have been me, I'd been like, hell yeah, whatever you need me to do. Sure. I can sleep.
Vacation? Let's do it.
Don't put me in a cell with anybody else and like, let me read a book or something, but that's fine. And it did buy police more time, to be fair. They also, while they were investigating in this little window, found Ronnie's diary. It's a little snapped together book that says 5-year diary on it. 5 fucking years? It's little. Anyway, in it, she mentions a man named Bob a lot.
Ooh, I don't love that.
I don't either.
Reminds me of like Twin Peaks.
The diary began in 1932. And at first she talks about Bob in like a very nice way. She talks about she's like very much in love with Bob. She misses Bob so much. She just pines away for Bob. She also talks about going out to dances with her friends. And she mentions how like every time a partner dance song came on, I danced with a different boy. Every time. I was like, okay, girl.
Okay.
She also talks about getting drunk with her friend Jean and eating chow mein. And she talks about being at a restaurant where a man tries to make a pass at her and to avoid it because like it was unwanted. She took off his derby, so his hat, and she stuffed it into his chest. She like grabbed his hat, was like, no, sir, and walked away, which is such a 1930s move, and I really like it. And then later on in the diary, she starts mentioning Bob in a very different tone. She talks about how she's afraid of Bob, and she thinks Bob is kind of threatening. And if y'all will remember, she did marry a Bob very illegally at 16. So the cops decided we should probably look at him, right?
Yeah.
Robert Flower had a solid alibi. He definitely was not in that area at the time. And that led them to pivot. Because what if there were 2 Bobs? The first Bob clearly was the one that she married. She's very in love with him, and then she's pining away for him because she had to get her marriage annulled because she was 16 years old. Then the tone is so different. Bingo. As it turns out, there were definitely more than one Bob.
Okay.
Before Frank Burns moved into the room in Mary Gedeon's apartment, she had rented it to a sculptor named Robert Irwin. Bob. And this man, as police quickly discovered, had a long history of violent mental illness and an award for ivory soap carving.
Wow. There you go.
He also had a dangerous obsession with Ronnie's sister, Ethel.
So Ronnie had nothing to do with this.
Nope.
And Ethel's just tramping on in there.
She's just in Long Island with her husband, wearing her tiny glasses and being a good girl.
My goodness.
I know. It is wild.
I'm impressed. Bob chose the right girl, sounds like.
I mean,
there's probably nothing wrong with Ronnie. She's just having a good time.
I think I would have liked Ronnie more.
Yeah.
I think I would have chosen that. I think that one.
Ethel's
Hang out
my
with that
girl.
one. Yeah, there you go. So, this Bob also had fingerprints on like catalog because he had done a bunch of weird shit, and they were a match.
Oh.
So he definitely did it.
When you say weird shit, Holly, please explain.
Oh, don't worry. It's coming around.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So police find this out. They're like, we got our guy. They release Joseph Gedeon. They're like, sorry. Definitely wasn't you. And they tell the press. At this point, they're ready. They tell the press, they're like, we know who it is. His name is Robert George Irwin. This is what he looks like. He's a sculptor. Find him.
Okay.
And they like task the public with this. It's like a manhunt. It goes bananas. They were bored at those times too. Like this was interesting. Everybody was looking for it. Not that nobody's bored today. Like we would, if that came out in the news, I would know a million people that were looking for this guy.
Well, yeah, we do stuff like that all the time.
We absolutely do.
We were looking for like Brian, what's his name?
Brian Laundrie. Yeah, it's very similar. And they refer to this manhunt as just as sensational and huge as the search for the Lindbergh baby. And that's the relation to that case.
Okay. Man, update your references.
I know. I'm reading articles from that day.
I know.
So that's why. So the police start poking into Robert Irwin, and it wasn't hard to find out things about him because he had been places. And here's what they found. And it just gets like, he just gets weirder and scarier by the second.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So first of all, I told you he won the ivory soap contest.
Yeah.
And the judge was like,
what?
Yeah. I didn't. Sorry.
I knew that.
So Robert George Irwin was born on August 7th, 1907 to evangelist parents in Arroyo Seco Park near Pasadena, California. But he wasn't born Robert George. Oh, no. His
No?
parents really showed their crazy cards very early on. He was originally named after the nearby river and one of his father's favorite theologians, Francois Fenelon, which made him Fenelon Arroyo Seco Irwin.
Why change that name?
What would you even call him? Fenny?
Francois?
Mm-hmm. No, because the Francois is not there. He used the last name.
Oh, right.
Of course, he changed that mess later on. You
Yeah.
can't be keeping that. When wouldn't we all? But he was also kind of a symbolic dick about it when he changed his name. In his late teen years, he chose to change his name to Robert George in honor of his philosophical hero, the famous agnostic philosopher, so no religion at all, Robert George Ingersoll.
Okay.
So he was like, want to name me after a park and a theologian? I'm going to change it to the opposite. His father was a man named Reverend Benjamin Hardin Irwin. No relation to the croc hunter people.
Yeah.
Leave them alone.
I was going to ask.
Don't think that.
The dog history of the...
What if it was? What if I'm like, and then?
Yeah.
But this guy was nationally known. He was a big deal in something called the Holiness Movement, who founded a racially integrated radical holiness denomination in 1898 at a national convention in legally segregated Anderson, South Carolina. So they're kind of fighting for racial justice for a minute. So for a second, they look good, but they're not great, just
Okay.
FYI. And some of these little facts are wiki roundups, just to let you guys know, because this is a lot of facts at once. This guy also denounced everything as sinful. He, from Coca-Cola, you couldn't drink Coke.
Right.
You couldn't wear a tie.
Okay.
I don't know why a tie. I mean, I've seen so many religious people wearing ties, but he didn't like them. And the church that this guy founded later became known as the International Pentecostal Holiness Church. So I believe this is a similar movement to snakes and speaking in tongues, though I could be wrong. I did not look too deeply into it. In 1900, though, a sexual scandal ended his career, the father's career, with the fire-baptized holiness church where he was working.
Okay.
And then he went off on his own. So he had some sex scandal with a younger person, and then he had to leave that church and he made his own congregation. Great guy. So he moved to Canada sometime in 1902, where he met and married Robert's mother, Mary Lee Jordan, who had lived in Texas, but he didn't divorce his first wife. So technically he's a bigamist. He's married to some woman somewhere else, and then he runs away and marries another woman. So that's cool. They have Robert together. And before Robert turns 3 years old, his father also decides, I'm going to leave this family too and find another one. So he deserts Robert and his mother and leaves them totally impoverished. Because remember, his father's a religious figure. They didn't have a lot of money. So a family court judge noted to Robert's mother, I guess they had gone to the legal system to look for some sort of assistance because they really had nothing. The judge said that Robert could go to a state reformatory and learn a trade. So at the time, you could send your kid to prison to learn a trade.
Okay.
And Robert was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So he spent 15 months there learning to sculpt at a prison.
Well, there you go.
He didn't learn anything like carpentry or, I don't know, plumbing or something that would be a trades trade. He learned how to sculpt, and he made busts of famous figures. I don't know why this was how he was going to make a living. And he came to idolize a man named Laredo Taft, who was one of America's leading sculptors of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He was so obsessed with this guy that he ended up moving in with the Taft family. And he worked for a waxwork studio in Los Angeles. He also ended up carving commercial busts of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and some other public figures, including Herbert Hoover. And that story is wild and fast, and I'm going to read it for you guys directly from the article really quick.
Okay.
This article is from the National Archives. It's called Hoover Heads, Lou Henry Hoover and the Mad Sculptor, published on July 14th, 2016, posted in Lou Henry Hoover. And I'm going to take a quote from it. Quote, Harold Schechter in his book, The Mad Sculptor, the Maniac, the Model, and the Murder That Shook the Nation, talks about an endorsement given by Lou Hoover to an early bust Irwin crafted of Herbert Hoover. A look at Lou's correspondence reveals that the endorsement came after a solicitation by Samuel Wardlaw, special investigator for the Los Angeles Public Library. Wardlaw presented his request in a letter dated July 31st, 1929. Quote, I am enclosing a photograph of a bust of the president made by Robert Irwin, a 19-year-old youth. And it's phenomenal. He was really good at his job. Robert, through unfortunate circumstances, spent some years in a state institution for boys, and his talent was not discovered until after his release. Okay. Without any instruction whatsoever, he made the bust and the attention of Laredo Taft. A sculptor was called to it. Mr. Taft now has the boy and is teaching him. A short note from you would greatly encourage this boy, whom authorities feel has a great deal of talent. Wardlaw also included Robert Irwin's letter to himself. Undoubtedly, Wardlaw counted on Lou being moved by the young man's plight and by Irwin's petition that, quote, if she was to write me a letter, it would sure boost my stock with Mr. Taft. Responding 6 days later, Lou wrote separate letters to both Wardlaw and to Irwin. To Wardlaw, she penned, quote, how generous of you to take such a personal interest in Robert Irwin, about whom you write in your letter on July 31st. Indeed, I shall be pleased to write him a note, and because there is no address other than Chicago, I am enclosing it in the hopes that you will forward it to him. Trusting that you will be justified in your faith in Robert, I am. Irwin's letter was also upbeat. Mr. Wardlaw has been kind enough to send me a picture of the bust which you did of my husband, and I want to commend you for the high order of your work. You are indeed fortunate to have been recognized by such a man as Mr. Taft, and I hope that you will work long and hard and someday be a great sculptor. That's nice.
So nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Perhaps Lou sensed that she had made a serious mistake when she received Irwin's response to her encouragement, dated August 19th, 1929, on, quote, the Midway Studios of Chicago letterhead. Irwin wrote, I have just received through Mr. Wardlaw your kind letter of August 6th, and I want to thank you and to assure you that it will always be kept among my most treasured possessions. When I showed it to Mr. Taft, he seemed very well pleased and he congratulated me warmly. I made this bust in Los Angeles more than a year ago, and I believe it has been destroyed. But I would like very much to make another bust of President Hoover and give it to you as a present if you would care to pay the cost of the bronze casting. Mr. Taft's secretary told me this would amount to $200. I would not ask you to pay for the casting, but I haven't the money myself. I can make it entirely from the picture as I have made the other one. It would certainly be a wonderful thing for me if you should let me do this. I hope you give the matter some consideration. I am sending you a few pictures of my work, hoping to hear from you. The selection of enclosed photographs included busts of Attila the Hun, Napoleon, Benito Mussolini, and Thomas Edison. This cast of characters would give anyone pause.
Oh.
Yeah, so she was like, no, thank you. I just thought that was such a weird little event.
That really is.
So socially, he was like super awkward, obviously. He did not really understand what was going on. And he is referred to in several articles as, quote, brilliant if erratic and at times violent. A title which he earned thoroughly. Because at one point, between sculpting and weirding people out, he tried to cut off his own penis with a razor.
Ooh.
Yeah.
He tried
to. I don't know how far he got, but he didn't succeed all the way. But it did land him in a state mental hospital, which he voluntarily was like, yeah, I think I need to go away.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad he realized.
Yeah, and initially he stayed there for a year.
Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I believe they deemed him to have schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really do much for him, but they said that's what he had. After his discharge from the hospital, he moved to the New York City rooming house owned by Mary Gedeon. So he walked out of the mental hospital and moved in with Mary and her family. And there is where he became infatuated with Ethel because she was kind to him. She would sit and talk with him. She would answer his questions. But she did not have any kind of love or affection for him. And she rejected all of his advances.
Okay.
And after a little while, he was not very subtle about it either. He became pretty obsessive and weird about Ethel. And they had to ask him to leave the Gedeon home. They're like, you can't live here anymore, man. You're making her so uncomfortable. Yeah. Which would make sense as to why Ronnie said she was afraid of him and that he made her uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because he would have. After this, he received further treatment for mental illnesses for 2 more years at Rockland State Hospital in Orangeburg, New York, and then was released in the summer of 1936. And at this point, Ethel, who he's going to find, obviously the great love of his life, had married Joseph Kudner. So she was married again.
Okay.
But instead of, he couldn't be with her, so what he did was he made a sculpture of her with a cobra coiled around her neck. When he had lived with the family, he had cast her face, so he had like a life mask of her, so he could sculpt her bust as many times and as frequently as he wanted.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, so he could just make her face over and over again, which isn't weird at all. Not knowing what to do with himself, he decided to enroll at the Theological School of St. Lawrence University at Canton, New York, because religion had done so well for him in the past.
Right, yeah.
However, he was expelled on March 18th, 1937, 10 days before Easter, for being unstable. They're like, he's got a lot of instability, and we think he needs to leave.
Okay.
Mostly because he had a lot of big, weird ideas about religion, and they did not like it. He then decided to rent a house just for a day for $2.50. Which apparently he could do. Well, he rented it for a whole week, but he was only there for a day. In a house on 52nd Street in New York City, which was just a few blocks away from Mary Gedeon's rooming house. So he's staying close to the house. He's like, Ethel's probably there.
Right.
Even though she's definitely not, and she's married and he knows that. I got kicked out of religion school. I don't know what to do. So he walked around the city and thought, I think maybe I'll drown myself in the East River.
Okay.
But then he mulled over for a while and decided he didn't like that. So instead, he was going to go to Ethel's house and kill her. What he really wanted to do was cut off her head and have that to go with his sculptures.
Okay. That tracks.
So he'd have a life mask and a death mask and the busts and her head because she was the most precious object in the world to him. So he felt that he should have it.
Yeah.
Swell.
He should have checked himself back in.
Yeah. So
he thought that that was less crazy than trying to cut off his dick.
Yep.
Typical male.
I can't all the way do that, but I am going to do this. I don't know what to tell you. So now we're kind of back at the beginning of the story. The crime has occurred. They're looking for him. And now we get to late June 1937. And his photo has been circulated for some time. And they have looked for him for a while. It's kind of wild that they can't find him because he doesn't lay low very often.
Okay.
Right? So finally, a pantry maid in Cleveland's Statler Hotel saw this picture that the police had circulated of Robert Irwin in a pulp magazine. So oddly enough, it is exactly the kind of magazine that Veronica Gedeon posed in.
Okay.
I want it to be the exact same magazine. In my head it is, but there is no word that that's true.
Okay.
And she noticed a resemblance to a bar boy she had been working with at the hotel for less than 2 months under the name of Bob Murray. So she's like, that guy looks like Bob. He cleaned out his locker and disappeared soon after she asked him about his last name and whether he knew about Robert Irwin. Not very sly. Don't ask him directly like, hey, what's your real last name? Do you know this murderer?
Yeah. You're a Bob. Do you know?
Are you this Bob?
Yeah.
I would assume he was just going to strangle me right there and then.
Did you meet this other Bob at like a conference somewhere?
Was there a Bob function that you were all at?
Yeah.
It's probably fun.
Like you all know each other, right? All you Bobs?
100%. So, obviously this is reported and the search becomes front page of the daily newspapers nationwide. And he knows like the jig is kind of up at this point. So the next day, the Chicago Tribune receives a call from someone claiming to be Robert Irwin and offering to surrender for a price. But the Tribune thought it was a prank.
Come on, Tribune.
It wasn't. The Chicago Herald-Examiner, a Hearst paper, however, received a similar call but took it seriously. Okay. And they made an arrangement under which Robert Irwin would be paid $5,000, this is illegal now, for an exclusive story that ended in his surrender. So they're like, okay, we'll pay you this amount of money. I guess maybe to pay your lawyer or something. I have no idea. But you have to come to our office. We will hold you there. After we print the article, you go right to the cops.
Right.
Which is shady, but man, they probably, they broke the story.
Yeah. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, Robert Irwin's like, that's how I'm going to go down. So he puts on a white suit and a hat, makes himself look all handsome.
Tie? No tie?
No, I think he had a tie on.
Okay.
Living on the edge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And came to the newspaper's offices. Its city editor, John W. Deanhart, and the reporters G. Duncan Bauman and Austin O'Malley kept him in a room in the Morrison Hotel. And they worked on the terms of the confession to the Beekman Hill murders. So they obviously had to have him sign a bunch of contracts and stuff. That the newspaper would publish the exclusive and briefly shield him from the police. The Hearst companies then flew him to New York City, where he was turned over to the police. At that point, the famous New York criminal defense attorney Samuel Leibovitz, who had represented the Scottsboro Boys in Alabama and was reported to have saved 123 murder defendants from the death penalty. So this is a big-time lawyer. This is like a Kardashian-style lawyer.
Okay.
He offered to be Robert's attorney.
Oh.
And here's the confession that he gave to the newspaper. I'm just going to read it because it merits reading. Quote, after he went to the Gedeon apartment, I drew Mrs. Gedeon's picture to kill as much time as possible. In comes this little Englishman. She introduced him to me and he went to his room. I said, I'm going to stay here until I see Ethel. She yelled, get out of here. So I hit her. I choked her. All the time, this damn Englishman was in the next room just 10 feet away. She put up a hell of a fight. My hands were full of blood. I smeared it on her face, and on her breast. I threw her in the bedroom under the bed. The Englishman. He couldn't hear any of it. Wow. Finally, Ronnie came in. She went into the bathroom. I thought she was never coming out. I made a sort of blackjack out of a piece of soap in a cloth. So this is like rock and a sock situation where you're going to hit somebody over the head. I hit her. But guys, remember, Ivory soap is full of air.
Right.
But the soap just splattered. I love that you included that.
Yeah.
I grabbed her from behind. I can very well believe that she was drunk because she didn't put up any fight at all. I took her in her room, held her just tight enough so that she could breathe, and she asked me not to attack her. Quote, please don't. I've had an operation. I strangled her. So here's just a little footnote on that. First of all, they used the phrase attack her. She thought I was going to attack her. He didn't attack her. That means rape.
Okay.
They couldn't say rape in the newspaper.
Oh, okay.
So they just used that. And that's what they use in all the interviews too. He obviously did attack her, but just physically, not sexually. And forensic investigations have since come to the conclusion, like looking at her body and stuff, that he probably was in there with her for like an hour or so in the bedroom, just like holding her down and trying to choke her out because it was not an easy thing for him to do. And she was very drunk. And I just had an operation. A lot of people assume that perhaps she had a pregnancy terminated because she was saying she didn't want to have sex with anyone because she had just had an operation. We don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't look for that. And I think at the time it would have just fit into the shitty image that they portrayed of her anyway. But that's what some people speculate. Back to the quotation. When Ronnie was dead, I looked at her with a sick feeling all through me. Her beauty was gone. Blue death seemed to issue from her, like a sort of spiritual emanation. My brain was working so fast I could almost hear it. The Englishman! I must kill him too. No, you don't. I stood for a moment over his bed. Asleep? But how could it be? I lifted the ice pick, point down, and struck. Afterwards, in the newspapers, I read that he had been stabbed 15 times. I don't know. It was morning when I stepped out and closed the door. There was an overwhelming weariness all through me. I was so sleepy I could hardly walk the short distance around the corner to my room. I went in and dropped on my bed. It was not until evening that I was awakened by the cries of newsboys below my window. Remember, I told you he could hear them. They were yelling about a triple murder. It did not frighten me. I was as calm as I had ever been. I was sure that I would not be suspected. I was so sure of this that I did not even take the trouble to move from the neighborhood, not for a week.
Wow.
He was right there for a week.
Wow.
And they had Dad in jail.
Yeah, yeah.
From Manhattan, he had gone by train to Philadelphia, by bus to Washington, D.C., by devious means to Cleveland, I don't know what that means, where he had stayed until surprised by the pantry maid's question. The 3 murders were not intended, he said. This is the Times. This is the actual newspaper article. He had intended to murder only the elder married daughter, Ethel Gedeon Cudner, with whom he had been in love years before when he was a roomer at the Gedeons. The murder was to satisfy an overpowering urge for a tremendous emotional experience. Quote, I thought that after killing Ethel, then they would kill me in the chair, but I didn't care. Then I said to myself that after being in the nut house all of your life, you can't go to the chair. They'll put me in the nut house again, and then I'll be there all the rest of my life, and I'll catch up with myself in a spiritual way.
Okay.
Sure. Great. You could just commit yourself if you wanted to. You did do it before. So after this is issued and he surrendered to the police, he is also questioned by the police, and this will kind of tie up any loose strings that we have. So this is the questioning by the police. In a statement in police headquarters in New York, which is not the same as the newspaper one, obviously. This is him talking to cops. He stated that he had killed Mary Gedeon, the mother, first, and he was asked, how? A strangulation? The following questions were then asked by District Attorney Dodge and answered by Irwin. Q, what time did you arrive at the apartment that night? Answer, something like 9 o'clock. So, as I mentioned before, he was there for a long time. I don't remember. Question, how did you get into the apartment? Answer, she, Mrs. Gedeon, let me in. Question, was she alone at the time? Answer, yes. Question, you talked with her, I presume? Answer, yes. Question, tell us briefly what you did before the first crime was committed. Answer, I drew her picture and asked about Ethel, and she said she was not there. I said she will be here, and I'm going to stay until she is here. Then she ordered me out, and I hit her and strangled her. Detective, what did you hit her with? Answer, my fist. Detective, where? Answer, someplace in the face. Question, you say you strangled her? How? Answer, with my hands. My God. Question, what did you do after you strangled her? Answer, I threw her under the bed. Question, what happened then? Answer, I waited for Ronnie. Question, before you waited for Ronnie, what happened when she was put under the bed? Answer, she was speaking about Frank Burns. Question, at the time you strangled Mary Gedeon, was Burns the boarder in the house? Answer, he was in his room. The light was off. Question, did you see him? Answer, I saw him previous to that. Question, what time? Answer, I suppose it was 10 o'clock or something like that. Question, was that before you strangled Mary? Answer, yes. Question, did she introduce you to him? Answer, yes. Question, what did she say when she introduced you? Answer, she said, he is an old friend of ours. It was brief. Question, then he went into his room and shut the door? Answer, yes. Question, then you waited and Ronnie came in? Answer, yes. Question, what did you do when Ronnie came in? Answer, she went to the bathroom. I waited. When she came in, I strangled her. Question, was she dressed or undressed? Answer, she was in her chemise or something like that. Question, what did you do with the chemise? Answer,
Shemazel.
much better answer. Answer, I tore it up. Question, what did you do after you strangled her? Answer, left her lying on the bed. I didn't attack either of the women. See what I mean? The word attack definitely means rape. Question, what did you do after you strangled Ronnie? Answer, I went in and killed Frank Burns. See, now most people thought that Frank Burns was killed before Ronnie got home. So it's interesting that I guess he was still sleeping that whole time.
Yeah.
He could have been. He was deaf. Question, how? Answer, with the ice pick. Question, in the bed? Answer, yes. Question, did he make an outcry? Answer, no. Question, was he asleep? Answer, yes. Question, how did you use the ice pick on him? Come on, man. Answer, I stabbed him in the head.
Oh.
Question, how many times? Answer, I don't remember. Question, what did you do with the ice pick? Answer, I kept it and finally discarded it in Philadelphia. Question, did you take anything out of the apartment after the 3 people were killed? Answer, yes. I took that alarm clock. Remember I said a clock was missing? Question, is this the alarm clock here? Answer, yes. Question, that was where you first saw it? Answer, it was on the bed in the room where Ronnie was slain. Question, that glove, is it yours? Answer, yes. Question, you left that in the apartment? Answer, yes. And I knew I left it there. Question, what happened to its mate? Answer, I threw it away on 2nd Avenue.
Okay.
That is his full, like, on the stand confession. So it does answer every single question.
Sure.
Rather bluntly and strangely,
Yeah.
but it still does. And a lot of people suspect he took that clock because it had been in Ethel's room at one point, and when she moved out, her sister had it in her room, so he was like, this is Ethel.
Yeah.
And one of the little sculptures looks kind of like Ethel.
Right. Yeah.
Which is why,
that makes sense.
yeah, they found out he was like, anyway. He just, direct quotes from him are so strange and still, I'm just like, oh, I can't get over it. Anyway, he also said on the stand, quote, Bob Irwin is nothing. I am only a receiving set, an extremely imperfect one, which can indistinctly tune in the divine mind. You have heard a radio that isn't working well, just like the radio playing in the apartment.
Mm.
You turn the dials and get a squawking. Only once in a while can we get the pure, clear music. My whole idea in life was to perfect myself so the receiving set could always get the divine music at its best.
Oh, man.
That's a nut job of a person. And he brought the ice pick initially to use on Ethel, obviously. He was going to cut her head off and take it with him. Which I guess he used in a separate confession, or police, like, they couldn't print it back then in the newspaper, that he was like, I was going to do this ridiculous thing. So anyway, hours after the police took him into custody, he was indicted for 3 accounts of first-degree murder, obviously. Contrary to Inspector Lyon's initial view that, so the first inspector was like, this guy is insane.
Mm-hmm.
We got to put him in a place for crazy people. But New York said, no, he confessed very clearly and knew he was murdering people.
Right.
So that means he can be charged with murder. The Office of District Attorney William C. Dodge also announced that it would seek the death penalty. The presiding judge postponed the trial in September of 1937 to await the findings of a 3-murder commission of inquiry evaluating Irwin's sanity. However, the commissioners concluded that Irwin was sane.
Oh.
I know, that feels flawed. New York District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey, who had defeated Dodge, resumed the prosecution. As Irwin's trial date approached in the fall of 1938, William A. Adams, the warden of the Tombs Detention Center, so he worked at a prison that Irwin was in, said, Robert Irwin certainly isn't crazy now. He's as normal as any man in prison, and this guy sees him every day. His lawyer, however, replied that Robert Irwin was, is, and will be hopelessly insane. He is crazy as a bedbug.
Oh.
This is stuff people say in a court of law.
Right.
Okay, guys. Soon after a jury was selected, however, Robert Irwin pled guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty and a promise that a pair of trousers he had abandoned in a suitcase left at the Grand Central Station in 1937 would be returned to him. He was like, I left my pants at the train station. I will confess, but I need those pants.
Crazy.
And they were like, this guy is not crazy. Get him his pants.
Right.
Great. That's great. He was sentenced to 139 years to life, which is more than life, obviously, in prison.
Yeah, but sometimes those people live long.
For 130 years.
Yeah.
He was then sent to Sing Sing for a psychological evaluation where the prison doctors ruled him, quote, very definitely insane.
Wow.
On December 10th, 1938, he arrived at Dannemora State Hospital, which was where he belonged.
Mm-hmm.
So this case was important for a lot of reasons. It focused attention on New York's symptomatic exclusion of women for juries. This is the last first-degree murder jury that did not have any women on it.
Oh.
After that, they allowed women to be selected for, I don't know what the linchpin was. It also put focus on the evaluation of people's mental state in New York, because clearly this guy had been unstable for some time. And clearly, like, that's what should have happened from the very beginning, but they really kind of threw it around.
Okay.
And, yeah, he died in prison at like 75 years old. Or not in prison, he died at the hospital.
Yeah. Well, he got close to 139.
He's trying.
Yeah.
And that is that.
Wow.
Yeah. Ethel lived a long, fine life with her husband in Long Island. Kept her head.
Okay.
It was fine.
Good head on that shoulders?
Yeah. Her sister, on the other hand. He accidentally killed them. He went there to kill Ethel, but accidentally killed 3 other people. That's what he said.
I wonder if she has survivor guilt from that.
Well, she's dead now, but I would assume I would feel awful.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you killed my whole family.
Or she's just like, well, that's why I'm the good child.
Maybe you should have done like me.
Yeah.
Got married and moved to Long Island.
Oh, that's rough, though. Interesting. So I had to look up the ties.
please
not
tell me.
wearing the ties. So
Why is that a thing?
I don't think that it's like I think really it just has to do with a like money, like having to do with like
trying to make yourself look
like structure
look classy, or like a class definition thing.
yeah.
Everybody needs to be even.
So I'll say that.
Oh,
Yeah, so I think it mostly has to do with like your class,
your social
your
class,
social
or
class.
economical or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So so basically them saying like no, like you don't wear ties to church is them really saying like, because some people can't afford to come to church like that. So we don't want to hinder people not coming to worship. And which kind of sounds nice in a way, like you're inclusive, but it's still also
you can't distinguish yourself for what you've
like it's
done.
still almost like a uniform that they're trying to get people into, to like look like dressed modest, casual, like but I know that they pull scriptures out that like quotes from scriptures about like what you can wear. I remember there being one about like women aren't supposed to like wear their hair in braids and have pearls on, and
that's much too fancy.
It's just too much.
So it's like an Amishy thing.
So so that's, I think it just has to do with social classes and them making sure that people will come.
Wearing your fancy ties and making the rest of us feel bad.
Yeah, and that's why the Catholics are.
How dare you?
Catholics are like, everybody dress nice. So it also brings, I think that's where wear your Sunday best is still like not necessarily about like dressing up. It's almost like being more casual.
Really, I've always heard your Sunday best is like nice.
Yeah.
You better be looking nice.
I know. Yeah, I think there's like two different meanings that people grabbed from it.
Wow.
I don't know. I could be, I think that's what it was though.
Don't you be wearing those rich people ties and coming into this church. You save that for your shenanigans on the town.
That's right.
That's all.
That's it.
Toast.
All right.
To, there's a lot of like really hapless victims in this case that just truly didn't do anything at all.
Well, like to Frank first.
Yeah, who couldn't even hear. And it was because he overheard things he got killed, and he couldn't hear any things. That killed me.
He was just sleeping.
He was sound asleep. And we find out at the very end, he was asleep until the end.
Yeah.
He walked in there and he was sleeping. You could have just walked out.
Ugh.
I guess his brain was like, well, this guy's probably faking it, and he just heard everything that happened. But no, he's like a deaf guy sound asleep.
Right.
Cheers to Frank.
Okay, and let's toast Mary and Ronnie.
Yes, to Mary and Ronnie. Sad. And they just wanted to have a great time. Obviously, we'll post pictures, and you'll see some of Veronica's modeling photos. She was very pretty.
Yeah.
I'll try to find some of the magazine covers that are like zesty and noir looking.
Ooh, yes.
So, yeah. And if we wore our best Sunday tie to church,
we would be dead.
Thank you for listening to the We Would Be Dead podcast. Hit subscribe now to never miss an episode. Rate and review our show on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Would Be Dead Pod. And join our Facebook group to discuss the podcast and more.
I can hear Barbara Daly Beekman clicking her tongue at it.